Hey everyone, I'm Wasianiverson. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a player who won the Set 8 mid-set finale. I've hit rank 1 on the NA ladder, and I also played at Set 8 Worlds. Today, I'll be giving a 2-1 item slam guide, and I'll be talking about the best early game items, and why some items are good and bad to make in the early game. So first off, in the S tier, we're going to have Warmogs, Sunfire, and Gargoyle Stoneplate. Now these 3 items are all tank items, and they're all extremely strong in Stage 2 to allow you to win streak and save HP. They also scale decently well later into the game, but they're just going to be extremely strong in Stage 2, which is why you're always going to be looking to make them early on. Next, we have Ionic Spark and Static Shiv. Now, Shred is almost necessary when playing any sort of AP-based comp. So these 2 items are very good to make early to ensure that you have Shred. And one thing that's very important to note is that you should only look to be making one of these items. So for example, if you have Spark, then you don't want to make Shiv, and if you have Shiv, you don't want to make Spark. And the reason for this is because these items don't stack, it'll only apply one time. Next we have Runon's Hurricane. It's a strong AD item, but the main reason that you always want to be looking to make Runons is because it kills Cloak, which is one of the worst components in the game. Next we have Deathblade. Deathblade is probably the strongest AD item. It's better than Infinity Edge in almost every scenario, and Infinity Edge is only going to become better at extremely high amounts of AD, which is pretty hard to reach. So anytime that you can make a Deathblade, you should be really happy to do so, because it's going to be one of the best AD items. Next we have Last Whisper. Now this is a similar case to Spark and Shiv, except for AD. So Sunder or Armor Shred is going to be very important in any sort of AD-based comp. So you're always going to want to make Last Whisper early just to ensure that you have it at all points of the game. Next, in the A tier. So first off, we have Deathcap and Archangels, and these are very good slams, and they're best in slot on most AP carries. The only reason that I haven't put them in S tier is because if you have the option to make a Shred item, like Spark or Shiv, it's usually better to make one of these 2 items rather than Deathcap or Archangels. Also, situationally, Jeweled Gauntlet can actually be stronger than these 2 items. An example might be a comp like Vertical Sorcerers, where you're already gaining a lot of AP from your trait. So after that, we have Guardbreaker. Guardbreaker is a very flexible item. It's very good on AP and AD carries, and it's also one of the best scaling items in the game because there tends to be a lot of units with shielding later on. The thing about Guardbreaker is that it uses a belt, and Sunfire and Warmogs are usually stronger in Stage 2, so you would usually prefer to make one of those 2 items if possible. Next we have Hand of Justice. Hand of Justice is probably the most flexible item in the entire game. It's good on frontline and backline units, and it gives damage and healing for any sort of AD or AP carry. It's also BIS on a lot of melee carries. The main reason that Hodge is not in S tier is just because it's not that strong in Stage 2, and also the tier can sometimes be used to make Shiv instead, and you would usually want to prio Shiv. We also have Gunblade. Gunblade, similar to Hodge, very flexible item. It can go on any sort of frontline or backline unit. And one thing that's really nice about Gunblade is that if you're playing an AD composition, it's going to kill your Rod, which is going to be a bad component. And if you're playing AP-based composition, it's going to kill your Sword, which is going to be a bad component in AP. So you're usually happy to make Gunblade both while playing AP and AD. We have Bramblevest. Bramblevest is just an okay tank item, but the thing about Bramblevest is you're almost always making it because it's really hard to use 2 chains otherwise. Same thing with Dragon's Claw. Dragon's Claw is an okay tank item, not particularly strong early in the game, but you usually just make it because it's very hard to use 2 cloaks otherwise. Now we have Blue Buff. Blue Buff is one of the items I'm most unsure about, and it seems like how good Blue Buff is will be very dependent on the meta. So there seems to be a lot of good early game holders for Blue Buff in Malzahar and Cassiopeia, and there also seems to be some good later game holders like Ryze, Ahri, and Gwen. But at the same time, there seems to be kind of a lack of like 4-cost carries, so I think Blue Buff could either be S tier or B tier depending on the meta. Now we're going to be getting into B tier. So B tier are the items that you maybe want to think about slamming. Usually you want to lean towards slamming these items if you're trying to win streak, and then if you're lost streaking anyways, then you would probably greed for some better items. So first we're going to have TG, and TG is a very flexible item that can fit into any comp and also scales very well. As you get higher levels, you'll get better rolls on your TG. So sometimes it's good to slam, but the issue about slamming it is that sometimes it can make it very hard to make damage items for your carry, because TG uses 2 gloves. But I would probably try make it anyways if you're looking to win streak. Zizira is a very, very strong early game item, but the thing about Zizira is it uses good components. It uses bow and belt, which are 2 of the best components. So usually there tends to be a belt or a bow item that you would rather make. And Zizira also doesn't contribute to having like a 3-item carry or a 3-item tank later on in the game. Locket is one of the best and strongest early items, but it's hard to use in a lot of comps, so I would only tend to make Locket if you have an idea of what you're playing and if it's good in the comp. That being said, if you know what you're playing, a lot of the time you're really happy to make Locket. An example would be like set 8, set 8.5 Duelist, where Locket was one of the best items at all stages of the game. Now, Bloodthirster is another healing item, but unlike Gunblade and Hodge, it's quite inflexible. It's really only good on like melee AD carries who can use the shield and the AD. So to consider making Bloodthirster, I would say you either need to know what you're playing or have like someone who's going to be a really good holder for Bloodthirster that's going to allow you to win a lot of fights. Titan's kind of similar to Bloodthirster. It's an inflexible item, but it can be best in slot on certain carries. You really just need to know like what you're playing, or you need to have a good holder to consider slamming this item in the early game. Infinity Edge. So I would say Infinity Edge is kind of strictly like worse than Deathblade, but you do want to make it to win streak sometimes. Like a lot of the time, it's going to be better to make the gold from winning and save the HP from slamming the Infinity Edge than like reading for the Deathblade. So it's really a case by case basis. But you should know that Deathblade is just stronger than Infinity Edge in almost every scenario. Jeweled Gauntlet, similar story to Infinity Edge. It's usually worse than Deathcap and Archangels, but it can be fine to make it if you're playing for win streak. We have Rapid Fire Cannon. In my opinion, this is an underrated item. It's probably best in slot on like certain melee AD carries. It's not as good on backline carries, but I think it's actually pretty acceptable. Like it gives a lot of attack speed, 55% attack speed, which you're usually happy to have on almost any backline unit. So I think a lot of people are scared to make this item, but it's usually fine to make it in the early game. The one thing about RC is like bow is a very good component, and a lot of the time you're going to have like a better bow item to make in the early game. Rageblade is a pretty mediocre item. It's not really best in slot on anyone, but the big thing about Rageblade is that it uses a rod and a bow, and it's pretty good on AD carry, so if you're playing some sort of an AD-based composition, it's good to make Rageblade just because it kills your rod. Shojin, similar to Blue Buff, I think this is also going to be a meta-dependent item. There seems to be a pretty distinct lack of 4-cost Shojin holders, in my opinion. The one unit that might be able to hold Shojin is Kaisa, but I think you might rather just have like some sort of damage healing Morello, since she already has a lot of attack speed from Challenger. So I think how good Shojin is going to depend a lot on how good like the AP rerolls are. For example, Talia, Sona, and Vel'Koz. So I'm just going to put Shojin in a tentative B tier for now, but it could be better or worse, really just depending on the meta. We also have Protector's Vow in B tier. Protector's Vow is a very, very good tank item. It's very strong at all stages of the game, but the thing is, it uses a tier, so if you're looking to play AP, that tier is going to be usually a lot more important to make like your blue buff or your Shiv, or even your Archangels. But if you're playing an AD composition, then I would pretty much always make Protector's Vow. Just very, very strong tank item on like everyone. Now finally we have the C tier items. These are the items that I would really look to avoid making, and you're really only going to slam if there's some reason that you're like really trying to win, like you're really trying to win streak, or you have some sort of augment or region that really incentivizes you to win. So first we have Giant Slayer. Giant Slayer uses very good components in sword and bow. And the other thing about Giant Slayer is it doesn't proc very often in stage 2. There's a HP threshold that's not really going to be reached very often by like low cost units. So I would only make it if you really need to slam something. Next we have Redemption. It's a very weak early tank item. Similar to Giant Slayer, units don't have a lot of HP in the early game, so you're not actually going to be getting a lot of healing value from Redemption. And there's also not a lot of like AoE damage in the early game, so you're not going to be getting a lot of value out of that either. Next we have Chalice. Chalice is actually quite a good item, but the issue with slamming Chalice is that it uses potential Shiv and Spark components in Tier and Cloak. So usually you would rather hold off on slamming the Chalice and go for a Shiv or Spark off Carousel for that shred that you're going to need later on. Morello is also an item that scales pretty well, but it has a really big issue in that there doesn't seem to be any good early game holders, especially this set. Like Morello really wants like an AoE AP unit to hold it, and it seems to me that most of the early game units, most of the early game AP units are like single target, and they're not going to be very good holders for Morello. Finally, we have Edge of Night QSS. These are quite inflexible items. They only really are good on like melee carries, and they're also very weak early game. They're not going to be doing much for your board in stage 2, so I would usually avoid making them early on because They're very committal and don't actually make you a lot stronger. And finally, we're going to have the D tier. These are the items that I would pretty much avoid at all costs. So first of all, we have Zeke's, and this item just sucks pretty much. It tends to grief your positioning later in the game because you have to clump your backline together, and it doesn't really have a high reward. 20% attack speed is pretty negligible at kind of all points of the game. In D tier, we're also going to have Shroud and Zephyr. So Shroud is very low value early since people don't have a lot of units. There's not going to be a lot to mana reave on their board, and it's also very easy to miss Shroud since you don't necessarily know who you're fighting. And people can position to one side and you Shroud the other side and you just get no value out of your item. Zephyr provides very low combat power for your team. It only gives you like 15% attack speed on the unit that's holding it. So I would avoid making it just because it really doesn't give you any combat power in the early game. If you guys enjoyed this tier list, make sure to check me out on Twitch. So that's twitch.tv/Wasianiverson_TFT. I'm going to be streaming a lot of PvE over the next couple of weeks. And if you enjoyed this video, let me know, because I was thinking about making a leveling guide in the future or making a rolling guide in the future. So if you enjoyed this type of content, let me know and I'll try and make some more videos like this. Thanks for watching and bye.